Hi all, welcome to another episode of Labbing It. Today we're just going to step back into our VMware environment and we are going to build out our cluster, which is currently um, sits with one host. So it's not much of a cluster if there's only one ESXi host running our environment. We're going to add two additional hosts to the cluster. That way, in the event that one of our hosts fail, we'll have a bit of high availability and we can start running our workloads on additional hosts. And the way that we're going to configure that is we'll manually build the two hosts, which we would probably do in most situations. But when we go to configure the host, we are going to use what we call a VMware host profile. And a host profile basically is just a configuration template or blueprint, if you like, that has a set of configuration that you would like to apply and have standardized across multiple hosts in your environment. So we're going to create that template and then we're going to apply it to the new hosts, and we'll should before too long have three hosts in our cluster. So let's just step into, actually let's have a quick look at the network diagram. So things are going to look like now. If you see just at the bottom of the screen, sorry, my pointer's not working. But we've got Mel-ESX1, which is our first host. That's the one that is currently running at the moment. And you can see the required IP addresses there. What we're going to be doing is adding Mel-ESX2 and Mel-ESX3 into the environment. We're going to still continue ESXi 6.7 for the time being. At the time of this video, I know that version 8 is out and running. It's been around for a little while now. But we'll build up to version 8 in upcoming videos. But for now, we just want to standardize everything with 6.7 because that's what I've got running at the moment. So if we just step into our lab and have a look at where things sort of sit. So here we've got our vCenter, our data center, and then our cluster. Our cluster has one host at the moment, Mel ESX1.JTAirlines.internal, and we are currently running two virtual machines. We've got a secondary domain controller, and we also have our vCenter server appliance. The cluster itself also has some key settings which we haven't enabled, obviously, because we don't really have a cluster of hosts to use at the moment. These are a couple of the vital settings that a lot of people will use, especially this one here. If you've got I think it's the Enterprise Plus licensing, you can, this vSphere availability comes with vCenter. If you've got DRS, this comes with I think the Enterprise Plus licensing. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but this is the one that most people want to switch on. vSphere HA, basically, if you have two or more hosts in your cluster, in the event that one host goes down, any workloads that were running on those hosts, albeit they'll be powered off because the host went down, but they'll be powered on another host that's available in the cluster. So that's what HA is all about. So let's get started. So what I will do is, now I've already got a previous video about building ESXi hosts, which I'll put in the description for this video, but we do need to add the two hosts. So if you look up the top here, from memory, these virtual machines here in VMware Workstation, this is considered our physical servers, if you like. We have one physical server called Mel-ESX1, which we've seen in vCenter. And just to reiterate how it's configured, this here Mel VSA1 is a HPE store virtual appliance that is our storage, and our ESX1 host is connected to that storage, and this is where all our virtual machines will run from. There's a couple of volumes on this VSA, which is attaching itself to the host, which will also attach to our brand new hosts once they come on board. And you can see that just from in here under Mel ESX1. We have a look at our data stores. This is the local disk attached to Mel ESX1. That's where the OS is installed. And here we have our two main data stores where we're actually running our workloads from. So these two virtual machines are running either on well, on one of these two data stores. And the way that ESX1 connects to these data stores is through a software iSCSI connection, which we have here. Storage adapter. Here's the details for this adapter, the identifier, and what we are telling it to target 11.50. So 192.168.11.50 is the virtual IP address of this VSA. And by virtue of iSCSI, it picks up these two storage devices and makes them available for use on this host. So we're just essentially going to set up the other two hosts in pretty much the exact same manner. So let's do that now. So let's create a new virtual machine. Typical's fine. I've got the ISO ready to go, and I'll call this Mel ESX2, and I'm happy for that to be the location. I make my operating system disks all 20 gig in size. And just to configure up the networking, again, there's a previous video on how I've set this up before, but I'm going to give this this ESXi host 32 gig of memory. I'll give it 4 cores, and I'll add a network adapter. So there are 2 network adapters on ESX1. So there'll be 2 network adapters on this. So when we are standardizing configuration across all of our hosts in the cluster, ideally, and you'll see that in most situations or most environments, all the hosts are pretty much identically configured, generally all with the same amount of memory, same amount of processors, and importantly, probably the same amount of network adapters. So they're all configured exactly the same. They'll probably have sort of obviously different IP addresses and so forth, but the configuration is standard. And that's it. And we go close, and yes, I'm happy to power that virtual machine up. So that's going to power up with the ISO. And if we go to the original host here that's actually in running, so we can just verify that the settings are the same. 32 gig of RAM, 4 processors, 20 gig for the main hard disk. We're going to use network capabilities, iSCSI capabilities to connect to the storage adapters, and that's going to be done through these 2 adapters. And they 2 are also on the same LAN segment, so they'll be able to talk to one another. As a matter of fact, whilst that is just loading up, I'm going to go ahead and make the third one. Mel ESX3, and they can go in the same location, same settings, 20 gig, customize the hardware, 32768 is 32 gig, and 4 processors, and that network adapter, and add another network adapter. So we've got 2 network adapters all on the same network segment, so they can all talk to one another, and power that one on as well. And here this is pretty straightforward. We're going to install the OS on the only disk that it can see, the 20 gig disk, US default, and the root password. So that root password is just something that you'll make up. It's whatever it is that you want to use in the future. If you need to use the root account to manage ESXi, and hit a F11 to install. This doesn't usually take very long. Get rid of that message. And whilst that's also booting up, I've just created a little IP management spreadsheet just so that we can keep an eye on all the IPs that we are using. So we're starting to build out our lab environment now. So we're adding ESXi hosts. I've already got, there's the first one there. I did just before I started this video add the second one, and now I'm just going to put the details for ESXi 3. Just by virtue of how I've set up the IP addresses here, I just need 2 lines for each host because of the iSCSI connections. Each host has 2 iSCSI connections on the same network. That might not be typical of every environment. Sometimes if depending on what type of storage appliances you might be using to connect to over iSCSI, though these might be actually across multiple networks. So I've got both connections on the same subnet. I do know things like Nimble, for instance, you would be creating 2 connections on 2 separate subnets, but for the purpose of this lab we're just using the same subnet, so the .11 network, which we'll see a little bit more very shortly. So I'll just put these details in. It's ESXi.6.7. The management IP address is 10.23. The first iSCSI address is 11.23, and the vMotion IP address is 12.23. And then we just quickly update the second line, and the only difference here is that we add the second IP address for iSCSI. And the way that I've just been, you could do this in any way, but just to make it simple for me to read, I make it 11.123. So the first one's .23, the second one is .123. And we'll need to know these settings, these numbers, when we configure our host profile. So let's just jump back into host number 2, which is complete. So just enter for a reboot, and host number 3 is probably ready to be configured for installation. Except the EULA. Yep, that's all good. So this is pretty much all exactly the same, very simple. And F11 to install. So that's going to go away and install the third host. So the only thing I do, which again I did in the first video when I set up ESX1, is I just apply the management IP address and the management network information, and I disable IPv6. So that's all I really do here. So if this was a physical server, I'd probably, if I'm not physically in front of it, I'm probably using ILO or iDRAC or something equivalent, the out of band management interface, and I'd be just logging in and updating the default management network. So you can see that it's picked up a DHCP address from my DHCP server. So all I'm going to do is just quickly go in here and change it to the address that I want. So the management address is 10.20, bit of numlock, 10.22. That stays the same, and that stays the same. That's all correct. That's for the IPv4 configuration. The v6, I disable IPv6. This actually requires a reboot, as you can see there on the screen. DNS configuration, I have 10.10 is my MEL-DC1 server, and I also have 10.14, which is my MEL-DC2 server. 10.10 is this server up here, MEL-DC1, and 10.14 is the virtual machine inside the VMware environment that I created in a previous video. And the host name, MEL-ESX2. And the DNS suffix, it's automatically picked up the correct DNS suffix, JTAirlines.internal. I'm happy with that. Just hit escape and apply changes and reboot host. Yes. So that's going to go away and do a final reboot. Let's check MEL-ESX3. So that's all done as well. So that's installed, and let that reboot. So the last thing I'll just fix up before we move ahead is just DNS. So just on my domain controller, I've got an A record for MEL-ESX1 10.21. I just need to do the same thing for the two new servers, 192.168.10.22, and we'll also have MEL-ESX3, 192.168.10.23. Done. So those will be now resolvable by name, and we'll just wait for this host to complete, and then we'll get into the next phase, which is to create our host profile. Okay, so that host 2 is ready to go, and host 3 is here. So as you can see, it's also picked up a DHCP address. So I'll just quickly log in, configure the management network. .23, that's all good. Disable IPv6, DNS, do that, and then MEL-ESX2. So that's all standard, and that's all good. And we can hit escape, and then yes for the changes and yes for the reboot. So it's just going to go and do the same thing. Just come back into our PC now. So just wanted to double check that we can ping MEL-ESX2. So that's all good. And although ESX3 won't reply because it's in the middle of a reboot, it does resolve the IP address of 10.23. So should be all okay there. Right, so the next bit now is just to quickly create the host profile. Now the best way to create a host profile is use an existing host that you already have in your environment that's configured exactly how you want them to be configured. And because I already have one host configured, I'm going to use that host as the benchmark or the template for the host profile. So under MEL-ESX1, under configure, down to host profile under system, as you can see here, no host profile attached. So what we want to do is create a host profile. So if we just come up to MEL-ESX1, right mouse click, down to host profile, and what you can do here is extract the host profile. So that's just going to pull all the configuration out of MEL-ESX1 and put that into a configuration file. And asking for a name, so maybe I'll just call it JTAirlines host profile. Click OK, and we can see now that it is going ahead and creating it, and it's complete. And if I come up to menu under policies and profiles, host profiles, here we have the host profile. Now we've extracted it from ESX1. Now this host profile's got nothing to do with ESX1 anymore. It's just now just a host profile that we can configure in any way we want. We can have a look in it, and we can just pretty much see all the different configurations that it's pulled out from what was set configured in ESX1. There's a multitude of information here. All the switch configuration, all the network, security, storage, everything associated to ESXi host 1 is all in this configuration file. And what we can do with this configuration file now, if we go back to hosts and clusters again, this is what I normally do, is I go to my cluster level, go down to configure host profile, and then I attach a host profile to the cluster. So this is pretty much saying that any host inside this cluster should be compliant with this host profile, should have the same settings, bar the essential differences such as IP addresses and identifiers. They obviously have to be different, but everything else needs to be exactly the same. So we apply, and now we see that ESX1 is part of this host profile, and if we highlight it and check compliance, now because this host is the baseline for the host profile, it should automatically be compliant, which it is. So there's nothing we need to do, no configuration settings that needs to be changed on ESX1. It is fully compliant. So what we can do now is add our 2 new hosts. Let's see if ESX3 is up and running now. Yep, we've got a reply. And let's add those hosts. So ESX2.JTAirlines.internal, add in the root account details, and I like this little box here. If you're adding 10 hosts, for instance, at once, you only just need to put the names of the server, and we don't need to worry about the root details, assuming the root details are exactly the same on every server. That might not be the case. We go next, and we get just a security alert, just for us to double check and ensure that we are talking to the right server. There's a quick way to verify. Actually, let's do that now. Let's just verify ESX2. It's got a SHA-1 thumbprint starting with EE, ending in 94D0, and you can always just make sure and verify by logging onto ESX2. And I believe down to support information, and there we've got the thumbprint there starting in EE, ending in 94D0. So that thumbprint matches, and so too with the other one. So I won't bother checking the other one. So I'm happy with that. Add it in. It's pulled all the details. It knows it's ESX 6.7 and ready to complete. So now we can see our cluster building up nicely. Now they've joined the cluster in maintenance mode, which is fine. But now what we can do is go back to our cluster host profile, and now we can see that we have 2 hosts. And if we go click all and then check compliance, what will happen is we should get non-compliance for 2 and 3, which they're not. And the reason being here, and you'll see a long list of different things that are quite different, but most importantly, what's really different, well, is the network settings. So we've got iSCSI port groups, we've got the vMotion port groups, we've got the management port groups. They're all going to be different because the network addresses have to be different, and also the iSCSI software adapter. So that's all going to be different as well. So essentially, what we're going to need to do is fix the host profile settings for each of these hosts with the specific details that we need to configure to ensure that there is compliance. So the best way to do that now, what I would normally do is I'll come to ESX2, come to host profile, and I'll edit the host customization. So it's not a fully automated process, but this is basically coming in and telling us these are the differences between the host profile and this particular host. And if I just move these around a little bit. Now we're only really concerning ourselves here. So what's got here, that's what's required. Anything that says a yes requires input from us. Anything that's with a no probably means there's no current setting on the host profile. So we don't need to actually do anything, but it is letting us know that there are some differences between the host profile and the server. And generally speaking, all it's really asking for us are the network details. So if I come to the first yes, it's asking for the name of the host. It's already pulled out that it knows it's MEL-ESX2, so that's okay. We don't need to change that. It's pulled that information automatically because we configured that manually ourselves. The same for the management IP address and the management network address. It's already pulled out the correct information, so we don't need to make changes. But we could, if we didn't want to use 10.22 for this host, we could update the management IP address right here and change it to something else, to 32 if we wanted to. But we're happy to leave it at 22. I guess more specifically, we're looking for yeses with no information. So there's our first one down here. But everything else, yes, already got information. It's applying a MAC address to the fiber channel over Ethernet adapter, which we're actually not using. But it says that we need to have a MAC address for that adapter, even though that we're not using it. But it's already applied one for us. So that's all, it's all done in software, so it's all okay. So if we look for something with a yes, that with a blank field, this is the first one. It's telling us, asking us for the vMotion IP address settings. And this is host number 2. So if I come in here, the vMotion IP address is 192.168.12.22. So I can punch that in there. And the subnet mask for that IP address, I do everything in a 24-bit subnet, so 255.255.255.0. And that's it for that setting. Looking for another yes. Here's another yes. This is now, it's asking for the iSCSI A IP address. So there's a port group going to be created called iSCSI A. That's a VM kernel port group, so it needs an IP address. And if I come into here, host number 2, this is the iSCSI. The 11.22 is the A port, and the 11.122 is the B port. So A port is 11.22. 192.168.11.22, and the subnet mask 255.255.255.0. All good. Let's just scroll back here. Can't quite open it up. Maybe if I put this back a little bit. So we've done that, and now it's asking for the iSCSI B IP address 192.168.11.122, and the same subnet mask. So that's all been filled in, and that takes care of everything else. Here's an important bit here. The iSCSI software adapter is being created, and it's going to have this unique identifier created for it. It's going to do that automatically. We don't have to provide the details, which is good. So we're all set there as well. So if we hit OK, and so we've edited the host customization. If we go now to try and remediate, so what we are doing now is apply the host profile and the customizations to our host. We can do a pre-check remediation, so this will check the customizations that we've made to make sure that it's actually going to work. And if we see down here, pre-check remediation underway, and ready to remediate. So everything that I've provided here in the customization is going to allow us to remediate and actually apply the settings and get this host into compliance mode. So let's hit the remediate button. And we're not really changing too much here, so it should be quite quick. There we go. And now it's done. Now let's do a check compliance. And doing a checking of the compliance. And okay, so we are still not compliant. Let's have a look and see if we can find specifically. Okay, I know why it's not compliant, because whilst we've configured the storage adapter now, so if we go into this host here, we see the storage adapter is all configured, but it's actually not connected to anything at this stage. And what the host profile is saying is that it's expecting there's expecting to be a couple of targets, some devices, and so forth. So But at the moment, if we look at the data stores, there's no data stores connected. MEL-ESX1, for instance, has these two data stores connected. This does not. So let me just while I'm here, I'll just rename this local data store. This is just something that I normally do. MEL-ESX2 local. That's just a local disk. So before we remediate the third host, let's go ahead and just finish off the host number 2. So there's a little bit of extra work that we need to conduct in order to connect this host to the storage. It's all configured, ready to go. So it's with the host profile. It's applied all the iSCSI settings. It knows exactly what it needs to do, but what I don't have is configuration on the storage end to say I'm allowing ESX2 to connect to my data stores. So let's fix that up. And the thing we need from here is this identifier that it's created through the host profile. So I'm just going to copy that address, and I'm going to load up the console to the storage. So as I've already said, our VMware environment connects to iSCSI storage over the store virtual appliance. So we'll just log in. Let's just expand that out. And this is going to start giving us a bit more information. Now I've got a separate video on configuring the store virtual and getting it all set up with VMware, so check that out if you need to. But essentially, if I just open up the Melbourne cluster for our virtual appliance, you can see here I've got 2 data stores or 2 volumes that I've created. And if I go assign servers, I've assigned MEL-ESX1 to this host, to this data, to this volume, and the same for this volume. And the way that we connect a new server is just up here in servers. If I go new server, MEL-ESX2, just do the same name here. Just ask for the management IP address, and then this is the most important bit here, is adding that IQN in, which I've done. It's not happy about something. I can't quite see what it could possibly be. Let's just accept that it should be okay. I'm not using CHAP. CHAP is just an authentication method if we want our hosts to punch in a secret in order to just provide a bit more security to accessing the data stores. I'm not using it, so just leave it off. Click OK. So here I've got my second host, and what I'll do is right mouse click and assign, and I would like for it to have read-write access to both of these data stores. OK. And continue. And now if I come down here, I can see this data store now has these 2 servers assigned and these 2 servers assigned. And I think that's pretty much it. Now if I come back to our vCenter, and under storage adapters, if I just do a rescan, as you can see here, nothing's attached right now. And a quick refresh, and now we have the targets attached. And if we look at the data stores up here, now we can see those 2 data stores attached. And if we come back to our host profile again, now let's run another compliance check. Now that those data stores are there, now we are compliant. So now it's happy. So that's pretty much it. So we'll do exactly the same thing quickly on the third host. I won't go, I'll just do it really quickly. So I'm just looking for yeses without any information. Let's just make this a little bit easier to see. So here's our first one, asking for the vMotion IP address. So I know that that's on the .12 network, and this will be 12.23, and the subnet mask is always the same. Let's scroll down a bit further. Here's the next one. So iSCSI B. So just make sure you keep an eye on what it's asking for. So it's 11.123. And that's it. Here's iSCSI A. So it's 192.168.11.23. And the subnet mask is the same. And that's about it. Now, it's funny there, it doesn't have the alias for the adapter, or is that not the same setting? Oh no, here it is up here. So what I might do, I might just copy that. Let's go ahead and configure MEL-ESX3 in here straight away. MEL-ESX3 192.168.10.23. Add the identifier. Oh, that's funny. It's got MEL-ESX2 there. Let's go back. Because that might be a little bit confusing. So I might just change that to 3, and I might just change that last number in case that does something to a 7. Let's go back in here and put that in, go OK. And I can also assign the volumes. So that's all ready to go. So that should hopefully just connect straight up once we've applied the settings. So let's go OK. Let's hit the remediate, and let's do a pre-check remediation just to make sure that whatever it is that we've supplied in these customizations can actually be applied to the host. Apparently it can. So let's remediate. And hopefully we get a compliance tick straight away, now that it should be able to actually attach itself to the storage. Again, this shouldn't take too long. Here we go. And done. And yeah, beautiful. Compliant straight up. So, like I said, barring say MAC addresses, IP addresses, identifiers, because they have to be unique to each host. What it's saying here is that all the servers should actually have all the same configuration. So we can actually take this host out of maintenance mode now and take it out of maintenance mode. And what we can actually do now is just update the cluster settings. So there are a few settings here. I'm not going to go into any details today about them, but because the whole purpose of this video was just to configure our host with host profiles. But now that we have got a proper fully fledged cluster, we can enable HA, and this is probably the key setting anyways, is to restart VM. So if there's VMs running on ESX1, if ESX1 fails for whatever reason, whilst those VMs do become disconnected in the environment, vCenter is just going to look and go, okay, these VMs are down because my host is down. Let's restart those VMs on another host and boot it back up, and hopefully restore connectivity to whatever it is that's gone down. So that's an option that you'd pretty much apply to every cluster situation. There's not a reason not to have that checked. I mean, it's one of the key purposes of having a cluster in VMware. So that's just going around configuring HA on each of the hosts. And the other setting here is vSphere DRS. I think DRS stands for Distributed Resource Scheduler. And if you've got the license for it, all this really is useful for is that it pretty much scans the loads of all your hosts. So if you've got, in our case, 3 hosts and maybe we had 50 VMs, what it's going to do, it do its best to manage the workloads of each of the hosts. If one host seemingly is way more overutilized than the other 2 hosts, then it's going to try and spread the load across all 3. So it'll start moving shuffling VMs around until it gets a nice balance. And there's some various settings and configurations you can make to your liking. So depending on how aggressive you might want to be in ensuring you've got balance or not, and a few various other things. But if you just tick the box for enabling DRS and leave the default settings, it's usually more than enough to have that work. And the other great ability of having DRS enabled as well is that if you go to put a host in maintenance mode, for instance, maybe you need to do some patching or something like that, any sort of maintenance task for the host, you don't have to manually move the virtual machines off the host before you put it in maintenance mode. DRS will do that for you automatically. So if I was to put this into maintenance mode now, I won't do it now because it takes a little bit of time in my lab environment to migrate. But if I was to put this host into maintenance mode, you'll notice that these 2 VMs are on the host, and it will initiate a vMotion of these 2 VMs to one of these 2 hosts that are going to still be available after this goes into maintenance mode. The final thing I just want to quickly point out, just going back to host profiles, is that should somebody, for instance, come in and make a configuration change. So the good one that I like to play around with is, this might be a good one. Say I decided to turn NTP off, for instance, just to go manual. Click OK. It's going to go and update the settings. Now, if I go back to the host profile and just run a compliance check, and it's going to say non-compliant. And the main reason, I'm not sure what this reason is, I'll have to have a look at that. I think that might be something to do with enabling HA perhaps, but the main difference here is it's picked up that I've just made a change to, there's been a change to the NTP settings, and it's not applying. So it's not compliant to the host profile. And what you can do to automatically fix that is just hit remediate and go remediate. And that should fix that setting straight back up so that it's back in compliance. And just about done. And now we're back to compliance again. And if we have a look at our time configuration, it's reverted everything back to the original setting. The other thing obviously is if you do go into host and into policy and profiles, and you go to the host profile itself, and say you want to make a system-wide change or a cluster-wide change. Maybe you want to change the NTP settings. Maybe you want to change the server address of the NTP that is used. Actually, let's do that. Let me just bear with me. I'm just going to find a different I mean, I could use a domain controller, but I might just find another. Yep, this one here. So if I change this to au.pool.ntp.org, so this is another NTP server located in Australia, and hit save. So it updates the host profile. And done. And just remember, there are a myriad of configurations here that you can update, change, so that you don't need to go to every single host and make that individual change. You can just do it once on the profile and then just apply it to the host, especially if it's a setting that's going to be exactly the same. If it's like an IP address or something that's unique to the host, then that could be a little bit different. But in terms of anything else, this is the best place to do it, in my opinion. So if we go back to host and clusters, we'll go back to the cluster, and actually the cluster is complaining about something. Really shouldn't be complaining about resources now. Let's reset to green. Capacity, certify, configuration. Anyways, I'll look at that later. If we go back to configure, go to host profile, host profiles, and it is saying that it's compliant at the moment, but it hasn't probably done a check. So let's do check compliance. Now these should all fail, so they should be non-compliant. They're not. And for instance, we come in here, it's got the same firewall rule here that we need to update. I'm not worrying about that too much. That's because I've enabled HA. That's why that's popping up. That's probably something else I have to look at. I'm more just interested in this change here. If I go remediate and go ahead. So remembering that the NTP was ntp.internet.on.net. Internet is just my ISP that I use. So it's applying the configuration changes to all the servers. And now everything's compliant. And just to verify, we can come in here, time configuration, and now we can see that that's been updated. au.pool.ntp.org, and everything is happy. Yeah, so that pretty much concludes probably what I wanted to talk about, host profiles and adding these two additional hosts into the to the cluster. So now we'll probably continue on with some other parts of the environment. I think my next video I'm going to be looking at certificate services, because I want to get all these hosts with vCenter itself with a proper certificate. So that's probably what I'll work on next. But thank you so much for watching and taking the time. I hope it's been somewhat valuable to you. Please leave any comments or anything where you normally would leave them, and I'll review them later. Otherwise, thanks very much.